My newest party has been getting along quite nicely. There's a total of 8 players, which is a lot for me, but they've still cut out the time to have a lot of one-on-one engagements to get to know each other's characters better. Each of them has unique and interesting backstories that I can't wait to explore in-game. But what do you do when your players ignore the parts of the story that you want to tell? As to say, what do you do when they don't pay attention to your plot hooks? All that and more on today's page. Hello one and all, and thank you for opening up your Dungeon Master's Handbook. My name is Russell, and on today's page we have dealing with situations where your players do not grasp at the plot hooks that you've laid out in front of them. This came up in a recent session that I DM'd. Let me give you a little bit of context to the scenario we were in. I've mentioned the human gunslinger in the past on this channel. His name is Cyrus. Cyrus is from the capital city of the Octavian Empire, Andorra, and worked there as a guard/investigator for a few years. However, he left his post after his brother, who had been making homemade rifles and pistols, went missing along with almost all of his guns. Cyrus was led to believe that his brother's leaving or abduction was because of his guns one way or another, and so Cyrus's only plan is to go anywhere where he can find anything to do with the guns. Fast forward to session 3. The party is now level 2 after some hard-fought encounters with goblins, panthers, and darklings. They're in a city called Salonilas, which rests on stilts above a marshland between 3 waterfalls. A private town crier has alerted the people of the city that a security team from the capital is coming to take some secret payload out of the city. Cyrus dressed in his old guard uniform and had Darian, the party's warlock, cast disguise self as another nondescript guard. In their disguises, they found their way to where the payload was being picked up from, which was a clothier in town. They acted as though they were sent by the guard to ensure that the package was ready to get on the cart for Andorra. Through some below-average rolling, the owner of the payload was suspicious, but because of their clever disguise, he granted them access to see what the package was. Cyrus opened it up and immediately identified it as 3 large barrels of gunpowder. Cyrus and Darian took this information back to the party and discussed. The rest of the party did not know they were off doing this mission, so they decided to track down the town crier to see if he had any more information on the topic. Jove, the party's bard, was persuasive enough to get the town crier to give up a little bit more information. It turns out that the gunpowder was being brought into town from deep within the jungle, about a day's travel south of the city. So Cyrus was left very confused. He had only seen his brother create gunpowder, and had not seen it used in any circumstance other than guns. I should come out and say at this point that cannons do not exist within my setting. So how did the shopkeep make or find the gunpowder? Is his brother being held in the jungle to produce it? Or has his brother taught someone else to do it? And maybe that person could have information on where the brother is now? Either way, from my point of view, there's definitely something here that Cyrus would be interested in. But something happened that I wasn't expecting. The party was discussing their next move. Cyrus deep down wanted to investigate, but ultimately the party decided not to. Some of the party feared being caught and imprisoned for impersonating a guard, and some thought they weren't well equipped enough to take on some sort of government conspiracy. And so, my plot hook for that session was shot down. I had already prepared who or what would be waiting in the jungle, but they weren't going to explore it that day. Now, I can't blame my players at all. Their points were incredibly valid and still may reign true. But where did I go from there? I had to rely on 2 different things to help continue the session. First, good world building, and second, random encounters. The party had decided to skip town to a coastal port city named Porton, which is a couple days' travels away. The journey there was down an established path, but was still through general wilderness. And since they were at low levels, I thought random encounters on the road could be interesting and relatively harmless. I relied on Xanthar's Guide to Everything and @CriticalDice on Instagram for inspiration for my random encounters. They were traveling through a relatively dense jungle, so I looked for encounters involving plants, monstrosities, and beasts. Some of the encounters I made were not combat-based as well. I made a list of 6 that I liked and put them on my session notes. The party traveled throughout the day, and I would ask one player to roll a d10, and I would roll one behind the DM screen. If the 2 are the same, and then a random encounter would trigger. The reason I don't roll on the entire D100 table found in Xanthar's is because there are some encounters in there that would require way too much preparation. As well, there are some encounters that would surely be more impactful than other random encounters should be. For example, if I rolled a 100 on the swamp table, which I'm treating the jungle that they're traveling through as, they would fight a CR8 Hydra at level 2. That would undoubtedly be an incredibly deadly encounter for the party. The Hydra is not smart, so it would definitely fight the party, and even if it was asleep or somehow preoccupied in a way that could allow the party to pass, if the party rolled poorly on stealth, it could still result in multiple party members being killed. Similarly, if I had rolled a 96 or a 97, a young black dragon would have shown up, and no doubt it would have hunted the party down. While there are some less extreme encounters that you can roll on that table, they would still require a lot more preparation. For example, there are bullywugs or orcs, and those bullywugs and orcs have to be a part of some organization or some sort of tribe. This is why I use those tables to find examples of encounters that require relatively little prep. For example, a manticore hunting some other large beast for food. There's no moral dilemma there. The manticore is an evil monster trying to kill the party. In my opinion, that's what a random encounter should be. Simple and without many consequences. Beasts, undead, plants, and monstrosities make for good random encounters in my opinion, because they don't require too much investigation as to why they're there or where they came from. Now, a good technique that I have used in the past and will undoubtedly use in the future is making the party think that the encounter is random, when in reality it ties back to some sort of plot hook that I've laid out previously. The party may think that it's just a low-stakes random encounter, but then their actions actually have an influence in the future. But being as this was the first random encounter of the campaign, I didn't want to do that just yet. Now, I have to come clean. This encounter with the Manticore wasn't entirely random. It happened on the last day of travel between the two cities. The party had been spending a good amount of time in character talking amongst themselves. A bit too much time. Each of them had already completed any conversations that they wanted to have with anyone, and there wasn't anything to talk about particularly during the journey. They needed something to do. They were growing restless, and their intention was slipping to no fault of their own. And so, I forced a random encounter. We were only about 4 hours into our 6-hour session, and I didn't have too much planned for the city that they were headed to. I rolled a d6 on my random encounter table and rolled the Manticore combat, so I ran it. It took up a good bit of time while still being compelling and an interesting combat. All in all, it was a success. So I guess the lesson learned there is sometimes you just have to roll initiative. So, the party made it through the forest and arrived at Porton. This leads me to my second lesson of the day, the importance of world building. Luckily, 2 of my players' characters were from Porton, so that gave me a little bit extra breathing room when they arrived. The party had decided to go to Porton without really any indication in previous sessions, but I knew what the party would find for them there. I had spent about 3 months world building all of the cities within my world, so I knew what was waiting for them. I knew that Porton served as a security city for imports coming into the Octavian Empire. I knew its port was expansive, and that the Empire's guard and military presence was very large. I knew that it was walled, and I knew that crime was very low. With help from my half-elf cleric of Ioun and my water genasi monk of Melora, I knew that both of these gods would have a strong presence in the city as well. All of this information gave me just enough to let the characters explore the city before the session ended. They finished up by doing some research in a local library. Somewhat unfortunately, the research they were doing required a lot of knowledge of my world. The rogue looked up stories of sea monsters, the warlock looked up the history of warlock magic, among other things. Luckily, I was able to think of something for all of them to learn, appropriate to their investigation roles. So, that day, putting effort into my world building well in advance and having some interesting random encounters at the ready really helped make the session go well. But, what do you guys think? How do you deal with it when the party doesn't do what you had planned? Let me know in the comment section down below. I hope you learned something from this video. As always, thanks for watching, and I hope you find yourself at a table real soon.